Okay, today we're going to be talking about definite and indefinite articles in Spanish. And those are just fancy grammatical terms for the, a, and an. So the definite article is the, and the indefinite articles are a and an. Before we get too deep into talking about the articles, we need to talk about nouns in Spanish. Now, all nouns in Spanish have gender, even if the noun isn't gender related. So we have some examples here of gender related nouns. So you can see niño, which means boy. That's a gender related noun. Niña, girl. Hombre, mujer. Those are gender related nouns. So by looking at those, if you know what they mean, it's obvious whether they are masculine or feminine. But there are far more non gender related nouns, meaning nouns that aren't specific to a certain gender. For example, book. Books don't have gender. So you see libro there. Casa is a house. That house doesn't have gender. Clase is a class. Although there's people in it that have genders, a class itself doesn't have a gender. Flower. A flower as a whole, unless you want to get scientific and technical, also doesn't really have a gender. So if you have gender related nouns like these, it's going to be easy to decide which article that you want to use, because whenever you choose an article in Spanish, you're going to base it off of gender of the noun and how many of the noun there are, which is also called number. So if you look at these and you know that niño means boy, you know that you're going to use a specific definite or indefinite article that matches something that's masculine. But over here with our non gender related nouns, the meanings don't really help us much because they're not related to a gender. So we're going to talk about some tips and tricks about how to tell whether or not these non gender related nouns are masculine or feminine. And seeing as we are dealing with parts of speech and not necessarily people, there is only going to be masculine and feminine that we'll be talking about as far as gender goes for these. So you can usually tell the gender of a noun based on how the word ends, meaning the final letter or letters of a word. For example, you know that a noun is masculine if it ends in an O, or if it ends in an OR. So, for example, if you were to see the Spanish word libro, Libro, ends in an O, so that tells you that it's masculine. Or the word profesor ends in OR, that tells you that it's masculine. And feminine endings. If you see a Spanish noun that ends in the letter A or the letter combination ion, those are going to usually be feminine. So you would use feminine articles with them. Now, also, you're going to notice that sometimes you're going to have nouns that end in the letter E. Or maybe you're going to have a noun in Spanish that ends in a consonant like R or N, some other consonant. And you usually can't tell their gender just by looking at them. So when you have words like this that end in an E or end in a consonant that's not here, the ion or the or, it's some other consonant or letter combination. Usually you're going to learn these as you go along. So it's my advice to you to make sure that as you are learning a new noun, you also learn its gender. So that way you know how to use it in speech and writing in the future. Now, these here, the O or OR for masculine and the A and ion for feminine, these are general rules. And if you have learned anything so far this year, you know that in Spanish, as in, any language or life in general, really, rules have exceptions. But these endings, and this concept here, they cover a lot of words. So the ones that are not normal and they are exceptions to the rule, or ones that end in an E, or they don't have that, or they end in a consonant, these are the exceptions, and you'll learn these as you go along. But make sure that you make note of them, especially when you see a new word that you are just learning. So now we've talked about gender. Why? Because in Spanish, the gender of a noun affects other words around it. For example, the words that we're talking about in this lesson, the, a, and an. All three of these are affected by the gender of a noun. So, as I mentioned earlier, the is also known as the definite article, or in Spanish, it's el artículo definido. And a and an are known as the indefinite articles, or el artículo indefinido. And if you think about it, it makes sense, because definite article, if I say the book, I'm being definite. I know what book I'm talking about. The book that's right over there. If I am using an indefinite article, then that's not as definite. I might be talking about, you know, a lot of different books, or a lot of possibilities are there. So I could say something like, I'm looking for a book about how Christmas is celebrated in Mexico. Then there's a lot of possibilities for that. So it's not definite. So that's why these have those names. So definite article is the, indefinite articles are a and Spanish has 4 definite and 4 indefinite articles. English has 1 definite article and 2 indefinites. In English, that 1 definite article is the. In English, the 2 indefinite articles are a and an. Spanish has 4 and 4. And we're going to take a look at these now and see how they work. Okay, we're going to do the definite articles first, los artículos definidos, which again, these all mean the. El, los, la, and las, all 4 of these mean the. You're just going to use them in different situations. So let's do some examples with this. The first one, a word that we already did, was libro. So if I was going to say the book, I would say el libro. Another example with el would be, let's see, blanking on something to say. El café. Or I could say el refresco. Libro, as I already mentioned, means book. Café can mean like a cafe, like Starbucks, a place you would go to get coffee, or it also means coffee itself. And then el refresco is like a soft drink, like a soda. So if you look here, you can see libro ends in an O, refresco ends in an O. And we mention those as patterns that tell you that you're using masculine. So el is masculine. So let's make note of that up here. Masculine. Now here we see café. Café ends in an E with an accent over it. That's going to fall into one of our exceptions. One of the words that we're going to encounter in Spanish that doesn't fall into some of the rules. So that's one that you learn as you go along. So now here's one that you know. El café That means coffee or cafe, and it's masculine, and you use el. Another word that you might put under this category that would use el to mean the would be something like a lot of professions that you're using to refer to a man end this way. So I could say el doctor, which is, of course, a cognate. El doctor is the doctor. That ends in OR, and we said that OR was also one of those patterns that's always going to tell us masculine. Libro, café, refresco, doctor. They are all masculine, and they all use el for the. Something else that you also want to make note of here is that they're all singular. So when you want to say the followed by a noun, and that noun is both masculine and singular, you're going to use el. How do you know that these four words are singular? Because they do not end in an S. Which brings us to our next column. If we wanted to talk about a word that was plural and masculine, and we'll make a note of that up here, we would use los. So we could just go straight across and say, if we want to say the books, we say los libros. If we want to say the sodas, the soft drinks, we say los refrescos. If we want to say the doctors, notice what I'm going to do here. With libros and refrescos, I just added an S because they had O's in front of them. O's are vowels. Los doctores. Now, here, this word didn't end in a vowel, didn't end in an O or an E. So, in cases like that, you have to add ES to them. I left café alone because café is, again, one of these words that's constantly being an exception, and in the plural, it would be the same, dos café. So we go over to the right a little bit more, and we have la, and we have las. Again, both of which mean the. So, like over here, where el, we said, was masculine, la is feminine. And remember, we said that feminine words tend to end in the letter A, or the letter combination ion with an accent over the O. So a couple of examples of words that would use la to mean the would be, let's see, la enfermera ends in an A. So that would be la enfermera, which means the nurse. La lección. La lección means the lesson. That ends in the letter combination ion with an accent over the O. So that's how we know that that's feminine. La enfermera, the nurse. La lección, the lesson. Let's see, let's think of a weird one. Well, this one isn't really weird, but we'll say la estudiante. La estudiante. La estudiante means the student, but this student in question is female. It ends in an E. And remember, if a noun ends in an E in Spanish, that really doesn't help us figure out if it's masculine or feminine. So in this case, you know that the word is feminine because that la is going to be in front of it. By the way, estudiante could also go over here. Estudiante. Because if the student in question is male, you would use the same word. So when you just say the word estudiante, you don't know if I'm talking about a specific gender or not. The way that you're going to know if you need to apply a gender in this situation is by words around it, like el. El estudiante would tell you that the student was a boy. La estudiante would tell you that the student is a girl. And then we can do the same thing over here with las. Because remember, la, just like el, is feminine, but it's also plural. Excuse me. It is also singular. So la is feminine and singular. So las, also feminine, but now plural. And again, notice the two plural articles. They end in s's. So that's how you know that's something similar to English. So la enfermera meant the nurse. The nurses, las enfermeras. La lección, the lesson. Las lecciones, the lessons. La estudiante, las estudiantes, the student and the students. So that is how your definite articles work. And yes, in this increasingly gender diminishing world that we live in, Spanish is a very gendered language. And you're going to find that having proper gender is going to be like having proper grammar. So it is important to be able to determine gender, and because it doesn't just affect, it's not just a quality of the noun, it affects other words around it. So it's important for communication. So those are the definite articles. Let's take a look at the indefinites. Again, an indefinite article is like a or an when we're dealing with the singular. So with un works just like el. It's singular and it's masculine. Unos works just like los. It is plural and masculine. So if you were to have an example like un profesor, that means a teacher, a professor. Un excuse me. Un oh man, I should have thought about these in advance. Un plato, a plate or a dish. So un profesor, a teacher or a professor. Un plato, a plate or a dish. So if you were going to need to use these in a plural, meaning you needed to talk about more than one teacher, you would say unos profesores. Now in this situation, unos, and this is also going to be true of unas, by the way, means some or a few. So unos and also unas translates as some or a few or a couple. So it's showing you that it's plural, but remember these are indefinite. Yeah, I was walking to class the other day and I saw unos profesores talking in the hallway. I saw a few teachers talking in the hallway. I don't know, it could have been like 2 or 3 or 4. It's indefinite. So going back and looking at un plato, a plate or a dish, that would become unos platos. So if somebody were to say to you, hey, go in the kitchen and bring in unos platos because we're going to need them for dinner. We are going to need a few or a couple or some plates. I don't know exactly how many. It could be 5 or 6 or 7 or whatever, but I just know it's more than one. So, grab a few. That would be unos platos. Both are masculine. Un, again, is singular, and unos is plural. Remembering that unos means some or a few. Now let's go over to the opposite side of the screen here for una and unas. So let's stick with teachers here because teachers are often female. So let's do una profesora. And let's do una acción. So una profesora, that is a teacher or a professor. And the fact that it ends in an A tells you the gender of this professor. This is a gendered noun. Una profesora. Una acción ends in ion, so that tells us that it's feminine. And una acción, an action. So if you needed to talk about these in the plural, yesterday I was, going out into the parking lot and I saw unas profesoras. Unas profesoras talking out in the parking lot. Again, I saw some teachers that happened to be women. I saw a few teachers. Again, it's indefinite. We don't know how many, but it was definitely more than one. Una acción. Unas acciones. Some actions or a few actions. So you can see how the noun that we're using is going to determine which article that you use, whether it be definite or indefinite. So one of the things that you are going to need to be able to do is when you are writing or when you are speaking, you're going to have to know what should I put in front of this noun that I want to use. If I'm, speaking and I need to say the, which one of these is going to go in front of the noun that I'm talking about? So you're going to have to be able to look at a word or hear a word in Spanish and know what is the correct definite article that goes with it. Or if you see or hear a noun in Spanish, what is the correct indefinite article that goes with it? And that's one of the things that we're going to be practicing together in class. And eventually you'll have an evaluation on. So that, ladies and gentlemen, is the end of our lesson. So if you have any problems or questions, of course, please feel free to reach out and contact me. And remember, this video is going to be posted in Classroom and it will always be there for your reference. Adios.